Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another quiet journey into the past. You may be resting now, perhaps lying back with your eyes closed, preparing for sleep. Or maybe you are listening as you ease into a state of calm focus. Tonight, we will travel to ancient Greece, but not the Greece of soaring marble temples, nor the lofty words of philosophers alone. Instead, we will drift into the slower rhythms of ordinary life, the daily struggles, the small routines, and the quiet endurance that kept society moving beneath the shadow of great names like Socrates or Pericles. This is not a tale of battles or conquest, though such events shaped the world. It is rather the story of how most people lived, how they worked, how they ate, and how they endured. You will find that life was not filled with golden statues and endless debates, but with grinding, with carrying, with endless repetition, and also with a kind of resilience that is easy to overlook today. Our journey will take place in 4 gentle movements. First, we will immerse ourselves in the daily life of ordinary Greeks, the sound of stone mills grinding barley, the heft of clay jars filled with water, the long reliance on olives, bread, and the labor of enslaved workers. Then, in our second movement, we will sit quietly with a story, one life, one moment, the trial and final days of Socrates, Athens' most famous and yet most controversial philosopher. From there, we will wander into mystery, to the smoky chamber of the oracle at Delphi, where words shape destinies in cryptic phrases whispered into the air. And at last, we will move into contrast, into the homes of the elite, where symposiums unfolded with feasting, music and wine, a world far removed from the rough hands of the laboring poor. So, take a deep breath, let your mind slow, and imagine yourself, not in a palace or a temple, but in a small, sun-baked home in an ancient Greek city thousands of years ago. Let's begin with the very pulse of ancient Greek life, the endless cycle of work. Before the sun fully crested the hills surrounding Athens, the city was already awake. Not with the roar of traffic, but with the clatter of wooden shutters, the lowing of animals being led to market, and the steady, rhythmic crunch of stone on stone. This was the sound of the quernstone, the hand mill found in every home. A woman, often an enslaved worker, or the wife of a poor farmer, would spend hours each morning kneeling, pushing a heavy stone back and forth over another, grinding barley into the coarse flour that formed the basis of their diet. Her back would ache, her hands would be calloused, but this relentless task was the first step toward the day's bread, the maza, a simple, dense barley cake that was a staple for most. While she worked, the scent of wood smoke would begin to drift from nearby courtyards as small clay braziers were lit for cooking. Outside the home, the streets were narrow, dusty, and crowded. Farmers from the Attic countryside would be arriving, their donkeys laden with baskets of olives, figs, or vegetables. You'd hear the vendors shouting their prices, the haggling of customers, and the constant murmur of conversation. A potter, his hands caked in wet clay, would be at his wheel, shaping the amphorae that would hold wine and oil, the lifeblood of Greek trade. Nearby, a blacksmith's hammer would ring out, forging tools for farmers or weapons for hoplite soldiers. For the vast majority of people, life was tied to the land and to manual labor. There was no concept of a weekend, no retirement. Work was a constant from childhood to old age, dictated by the seasons and the immediate needs of the family. The sun was their clock, and exhaustion was their companion. Even in the heart of the golden age, for most people, life was a matter of survival, a testament to human endurance written not in stone monuments, but in the sweat and toil of everyday existence. Now, let us turn from the anonymous crowd to a single, unforgettable figure, Socrates. Imagine the scene in 399 BC. Athens is still recovering from its devastating loss in the Peloponnesian War. The mood is tense, suspicious, and in the bustling agora, the city's main square, an old man with a snub nose, and a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions is put on trial. Socrates was not a wealthy aristocrat. He was a stonemason by trade, a man of the people who spent his days questioning everyone, politicians, poets, artisans, about the nature of justice, virtue, and truth. He claimed to know nothing, yet his relentless questioning exposed the ignorance of those who claimed to know everything. This made him enemies. He was accused of corrupting the youth and impiety, of not believing in the city's gods. The trial was a spectacle. 500 citizen jurors gathered to hear the arguments. Socrates, refusing to beg or plead for his life, as was customary, delivered a defiant defense. He argued that he was a gadfly, sent by the gods to sting the lazy horse of Athens into action, to force it to examine its own values. He was a gift to the city, not a threat. But a majority of the jurors were not convinced. They voted to convict him. When offered the chance to propose his own penalty, he cheekily suggested he be given free meals for life at the public's expense, the reward given to Olympic victors. This sealed his fate. The jury, angered by his arrogance, sentenced him to death by drinking hemlock. In his final days, he was not afraid. His friends gathered in his prison cell, weeping, begging him to escape. The jailer could be bribed. A plan was in place. But Socrates refused. He argued that to flee would be to betray the laws of Athens, the very principles he had spent his life upholding. He met his end with calm dignity, discussing the immortality of the soul with his followers before drinking the poison. His death became a defining moment in Western thought, a powerful story about the conflict between individual conscience and the state, between free inquiry and social conformity. Socrates left no writings, but his quiet, unyielding stand for truth has echoed through the centuries. From the stark reality of Socrates' trial, let us drift into the realm of the mystical, to a place shrouded in smoke and mystery, the oracle at Delphi. Nestled on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, Delphi was considered the center, the very navel of the world. Pilgrims from all over the Greek world, kings and commoners alike, made the arduous journey to this sacred site to seek guidance from the god Apollo. They came with questions that weighed on their souls. Should I go to war? Will my marriage be fruitful? Will my business venture succeed? The process was steeped in ritual. A petitioner would first purify themselves in the Castalian spring, pay a fee, and offer a sacrifice, usually a goat. If the omens from the sacrifice were favorable, they would be led into the inner sanctum of the Temple of Apollo. There, in a dark subterranean chamber, sat the Pythia, a priestess, a local woman chosen for the role, perched on a tripod over a fissure in the rock. It was believed that vapors rose from this chasm, divine fumes that sent her into a trance. In this altered state, she would channel the words of Apollo. Her pronouncements were often wild, ecstatic, and unintelligible. Priests standing by would interpret her ravings into cryptic, ambiguous verses. For example, when King Croesus of Lydia asked if he should attack Persia, the oracle replied, "If you cross the river, a great empire will be destroyed." He crossed, attacked, and it was his own empire that fell. The oracle was never wrong, because its prophecies could be interpreted in multiple ways. This ambiguity was its strength. It forced the questioner to think, to weigh the possibilities, to take responsibility for their own decisions. Delphi was more than a fortune-telling service. It was a psychological and political force, a place where faith, power, and human anxiety converged in whispers of divine will. Finally, let us leave the world of labor and prophecy and step into a different sphere altogether, the symposium. This was the exclusive domain of the male elite, a private drinking party held in the andron, the men's quarters of a wealthy home. After the main meal, guests would recline on cushioned couches arranged around the room. The symposium wasn't just a party, it was a highly structured social ritual. A symposiarch, or master of ceremonies, was elected to decide the strength of the wine. It was almost always mixed with water, as drinking it undiluted was considered barbaric, and to set the number of cups each guest was to drink. But this was far more than just drinking. It was a space for intellectual and social performance. As the wine flowed, the conversation would turn to philosophy, politics, and poetry. Guests would be expected to recite verses from memory, play musical instruments like the lyre, or engage in witty debates. There were games, like kotobos, where players would flick the dregs of their wine at a target. Professional entertainers, musicians, dancers, and courtesans known as hetairai were often hired to liven up the proceedings. These hetairai were often educated and witty, the only women permitted to participate in these male gatherings, offering intellectual companionship as well as entertainment. The symposium was a world away from the grinding poverty of the barley farmer. It was a display of wealth, leisure, and education, and it was here that many of the ideas we now associate with classical Greece were discussed and refined. But it's crucial to remember that this refined world was built upon the unseen labor of countless others, the enslaved people who grew the grapes, served the wine, and cleaned up after the party was over. It represents the stark and often forgotten contrast at the heart of ancient Greek society. As our journey through ancient Greece comes to a close, we are left with a mosaic of different lives, a world of deep contrasts. We'd felt the ache in the back of the woman grinding grain at dawn, and stood with Socrates as he faced his accusers with unshakable integrity. We've breathed the mysterious vapors at Delphi and reclined on the couches of the symposium, listening to poetry and philosophical debate. The grand temples and famous battles are only part of the story. The true foundation of this ancient world was the quiet, often harsh reality of daily life, the endless work, the simple food, the deep-seated beliefs, and the profound inequalities. It was a world both strikingly different from our own, and yet, in its human struggles and aspirations, remarkably familiar. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey tonight. I hope it has offered you a moment of peace and a new perspective on the past. If you enjoyed this exploration, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more journeys into history. Your support means the world. Sleep well, and may your dreams be peaceful. Forget the grand marble temples and the famous philosophers for a moment. Let's travel back in time, not to the halls of power, but into the heart of a modest Greek home. Imagine waking up as the sun just begins to touch the horizon. The air inside your home is cool, still carrying the scent of the olive oil lamp that burned through the night. The walls are thick, rough stone, and the floor beneath your feet is hard-packed earth. There's no running water, no electricity, just the simple, stark reality of another day. The first sound you hear isn't a rooster crowing, but the rhythmic scrape of stone on stone. This is the sound of survival. One of the women in the household, or perhaps an enslaved person, is already at work, grinding grain. They pour a handful of barley between two heavy stone discs, a quern, and begin the slow, circular motion. Hour after hour, this steady, repetitive grinding turns hard kernels into the coarse flour needed for the day's bread. It's a monotonous, muscle-aching task, but without it there is no food. Bread is life, and this is where it begins. Next, water. The clay jars, or hydriae, are heavy even when empty. You hoist one onto your shoulder and start the walk to the public fountain. The streets are narrow, uneven, and dusty. This journey isn't a quick trip. It's a fundamental part of the day, repeated as often as needed. You see your neighbors, all on the same mission. The weight of the full jar on the way back is immense, a sloshing burden that digs into your shoulder and strains your back. But every single drop is precious. Without this water, you can't cook, clean, or drink. Back at home, the day's meal is being prepared. Forget lavish banquets. For most people, food is simple and predictable. The barley flour is mixed with water to make a dense flatbread called maza. Alongside it, you'll have a handful of olives, some goat cheese, maybe a few figs or a bowl of lentil soup. Meat is a luxury, something you might taste only a few times a year during a religious festival. The real star of the Greek diet is olive oil. This liquid gold isn't just for eating, it's also the fuel for your lamps, a moisturizer for your skin, and a base for perfumes. It's a true cornerstone of life. And we have to talk about something that is woven deeply into the fabric of this society: slavery. In many households, especially those with any level of comfort, enslaved people are the invisible engine making everything run. They are the ones grinding the grain for hours, hauling the heavy water jars, cooking the meals, cleaning, and sometimes even raising the children. Their labor is so integrated into daily life that the entire rhythm of the household depends on them. Their lives are not their own, yet their presence is felt in every task, from the first light of dawn until the last embers of the fire die out. Step outside the home, and the sounds of the city drift in. Goats bleating, donkeys braying, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. The streets are alive. In the agora, the central marketplace, merchants are setting up their stalls. You might see someone haggling over a measure of grain, another trading hand-woven baskets for pottery, while barefoot children dart through the crowds. For most, this isn't about exotic goods, it's about basic survival, exchanging what you have for what you desperately need. Beyond the city walls, another kind of labor unfolds under the hot, unforgiving sun. Farmers are in the fields, tending to the barley and wheat. The soil is rocky and stubborn, and ploughing is backbreaking work. Many farmers use simple wooden ploughs, pulled by their own strength or, if they're fortunate, a pair of oxen. Their hands are blistered, their backs ache. Every harvest is a gamble against drought, pests, and the whims of the gods. Their survival and the cities is tied directly to the success of this relentless work on the land. As evening approaches, the day's labor doesn't simply end. There's still mending to be done, perhaps some weaving by the women of the house. The bread for the next day needs to be baked in a small clay oven. The family gathers by the faint glow of an olive oil lamp, its light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air is thick with the smells of baked bread, of earth, and of smoke. In this quiet moment, sharing a modest meal, there's a sense of tired comfort, a completion of the daily cycle. So this is the reality of ancient Greece for the vast majority. It's not a life of deep philosophical debate in the agora, but a life of grinding grain, aching walks for water, and repetitive meals of bread and olives. It's a life defined by necessity, endurance, and the constant rhythm of work. The marble columns we see today were built on the backs of ordinary people living these extraordinary, challenging lives. Now, as you settle into this rhythm, the turning of the grinding stone, the steady steps to the well, the quiet chewing of bread in a small lamplit room, let's hold this picture in our minds. Because it was in this very same Athens, on these same dusty streets, that a man named Socrates walked. He wasn't a farmer or a laborer, but his life was just as deeply tied to this city. And his story, set against this backdrop of everyday struggle, is what makes his ideas so revolutionary. Thanks for joining me on this journey back in time. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the sounds of ancient Athens, the clatter of sandals on stone, the murmur of voices in the marketplace, the faint smell of cooking fires in the air. This was the world of Socrates, one of history's most unusual and influential thinkers. He wasn't what you'd expect. No chiseled features like the statues of gods and athletes. Socrates was short, often barefoot, with a reputation for being a bit scruffy. His face, with its broad nose and prominent eyes, was considered almost comically odd. Yet, this man held the attention of Athens, not with wealth or power, but with something far more potent: questions. Day after day, Socrates would walk through the bustling city, stopping powerful men in the agora, gathering a crowd of curious young followers. He didn't lecture from a podium or write down his thoughts. His classroom was the street, and his method was conversation. He would approach someone and ask a simple question. What is justice? What is courage? What does it mean to live a good life? His approach was gentle but relentless. He'd ask and then ask again, peeling back layers of assumption until the person he was speaking with found their own certainty crumbling away. For some, this was electrifying. Young, ambitious Athenians were captivated. They saw how he masterfully revealed the contradictions in even the most confident arguments. To them, Socrates was a guide, a mentor. He famously called himself a gadfly, a stinging insect sent to keep the great lazy horse of Athens awake and thinking. But not everyone was a fan. To many of the city's elders and officials, his constant questioning was deeply unsettling. They saw him as a troublemaker, mocking sacred traditions, undermining authority, and poisoning the minds of the youth with doubt and skepticism. Athens, a city still recovering from a devastating war and political turmoil, grew increasingly wary of this barefoot philosopher. In the year 399 BCE, this tension finally snapped. Socrates was arrested and put on trial. The charges were severe: disrespecting the city's gods, introducing new spiritual ideas, and corrupting the young people of Athens. Picture the scene. A crowded Athenian courthouse, the air thick with anticipation. Hundreds of jurors, ordinary citizens chosen by lot, lean forward to listen. First, his accusers speak, painting Socrates as a dangerous radical, a threat to the very moral fabric of their society. Then Socrates stands to defend himself, but he doesn't beg or plead for his life. Instead, he explains his life's mission. He tells the jury about the oracle at Delphi, which once declared him the wisest man alive. Why? Not because he knew everything, he explained, but because he was the only one who understood his own ignorance. He insisted that his questioning wasn't an attack on Athens, but a divine service to Athens. And then, in a move of breathtaking audacity, when asked to propose his own punishment, he suggests, with a touch of irony, that he should be rewarded. He argues he deserves free meals for life at the public's expense, the same honor given to Olympic champions for his service to the state. The jury was not amused. The votes were cast, and by a narrow margin, Socrates was found guilty. When it came to sentencing, their decision was absolute death. Socrates was condemned to drink a cup of poison hemlock. His final days are immortalized in the writings of his students, most famously Plato. They paint a picture of a man who was astonishingly calm, even cheerful. He spent his last hours in his prison cell, surrounded by his friends, not in sorrow, but in lively philosophical debate, right up until the very end. As evening fell, the jailer brought the cup. Socrates took it without hesitation. He drank the bitter poison and lay down. His friends wept, but he remained serene. He described the sensation as the numbness crept up from his feet to his legs, until it finally silenced his heart and his voice. Plato describes the moment with a quiet, profound dignity. A man facing his end not with fear, but with the same rational curiosity that defined his entire life. And so, Athens silenced its gadfly. But in doing so, it created a martyr for free thought. The trial and death of Socrates has echoed through the centuries, a powerful story about the eternal struggle between societal order and the individual's fearless pursuit of truth. Think of that final image: a simple cell, torchlight flickering on stone walls, a calm man talking with his friends until words give way to an eternal silence. The noise of the city fades, and all that remains is the profound stillness of a great mind at rest. The story of Socrates is a reminder that the most powerful questions are often the ones we're afraid to ask. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. Ngiden, imagine yourself leaving the crowded city of Athens behind. The voices of the marketplace grow faint, the dusty streets give way to winding roads, and your path carries you into the mountains. The air grows cooler, the earth smells faintly of pine and stone, and before long you arrive at a place the ancient Greeks considered the very center of the world, Delphi. According to legend, Zeus himself had released two eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and where they met was Delphi. To mark the spot, a sacred stone, the omphalos, or navel, was placed, declaring this to be the earth's heart. Here, on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, stood the sanctuary of Apollo. Picture it, marble columns gleaming in the sun, grand stairways climbing the hillside, and treasuries built by city-states lining the way, each one filled with offerings to the god. But at the very center of it all was the temple itself, where the most mysterious figure of the Greek world resided, the Pythia, the oracle of Delphi. The oracle wasn't a priest or a scholar. She was a woman, chosen from the local population, believed to be Apollo's voice on earth, his living mouthpiece. People from every corner of Greece, and even from foreign lands, made the long, arduous journey to consult her. Kings, generals, and ordinary farmers alike came with questions that shaped their lives. Should we go to war? Should we plant our crops? Should I marry this person? The entire process was steeped in ritual. Pilgrims had to purify themselves in the Castalian spring, washing in its cold mountain water. Sacrifices were offered, usually a goat, to ensure Apollo's favor was upon them. Only then would the seeker be allowed to enter the temple and pose their question to the divine. Imagine stepping inside. The atmosphere is hushed and dim. The air is thick with the faint scent of burning laurel leaves, and the flicker of oil lamps casts dancing shadows against the ancient stone walls. At the heart of the temple was a small sacred chamber, the Aditon, which was off limits to all but the oracle. There the Pythia would seat herself upon a golden tripod, holding a laurel branch. Sometimes she would chew its leaves, other times she would inhale fumes that rose from a fissure in the ground beneath her. What happened next seemed to the Greeks nothing short of divine intervention. The Pythia's voice would change. She might mutter, tremble, or speak in fragments of words, her consciousness seemingly transported to another realm. Priests standing nearby would listen intently, interpreting her utterances and shaping them into poetic, cryptic verses. These words were then delivered to the questioner as Apollo's answer. But the replies were rarely simple yes or no answers. More often, they were riddles, ambiguous, open to multiple interpretations, and sometimes dangerously so. A famous example tells of King Croesus of Lydia, one of the wealthiest rulers of his time. When he asked the oracle if he should attack the powerful Persian Empire, her reply was this: "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." Encouraged by this seemingly positive prophecy, Croesus marched his army to war. He did cross the river, a great empire did fall. But the empire that fell was his own. This kind of ambiguity was the oracle's signature. Her prophecies forced leaders and individuals to think deeply about their own choices, placing the ultimate responsibility back on their shoulders. Even centuries later, the mystery of Delphi endures. Archaeologists have studied the temple's ruins, and many now believe the fumes inhaled by the oracle were real. Geologists have found intersecting fault lines directly beneath the temple that could have released intoxicating gases. Some theories suggest these gases, possibly ethylene, seeped up from the earth, inducing the trance-like states, the altered voice, and the visions of the Pythia. Yet even with scientific explanations, the sense of enigma lingers. The gases might explain the how, but they don't explain the what, the uncanny relevance and profound impact of her prophecies for over 1,000 years. Picture again that long line of supplicants waiting outside the temple. Their clothes are dusty from travel, their faces tense with hope or fear. Some have journeyed for days, even weeks, carrying questions that weigh heavily on their souls. Inside, the oracle sits, veiled in ritual, her words drifting like smoke, shaping the decisions of nations and the fates of individuals. For the ancient Greeks, Delphi was not just a sanctuary, it was a mirror of their world. It reflected their deep longing for guidance, their belief in divine will, and their wise acceptance that truth is often uncertain, shrouded in mystery. And so the oracle spoke for centuries, her voice weaving through history, her temple standing as both a place of profound faith and a puzzle that still captivates us today. As the lamps dim in the temple and the last question of the day is asked, the mountain air grows cool outside, shadows lengthen over the sacred valley, and the whispers of prophecy fade into silence. From this world of sacred mystery and heavy burdens, let us now turn to another side of Greek life. Not sacred, not burdensome, but worldly and elite. For while many labored in fields or walked miles for water, there were others who passed their nights reclining on couches, sipping wine, and listening to poetry at the symposium. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey to Delphi. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more dives into the ancient world. See you next time. Let's leave the smoky chamber of Delphi and step back into the city. But this time, we're not heading to the bustling marketplace. Instead, we're going to a private home, a residence of wealth and status. The sun has set, the streets are quieting down, but inside this house, light flickers, wine flows, and music drifts softly through the air. Welcome to the symposium, the evening gathering of the Greek elite. The word itself means drinking together, but it was so much more. It was a social ritual, a place where men of standing came to converse, to recline, and to display their refinement. Imagine the setting. We're in the Andron, a room designed specifically for this occasion. The floor might be decorated with intricate mosaics, the walls painted with elegant designs. Around the room are couches, low and broad, where guests don't sit upright, but recline on one elbow, angled toward each other. Each man is comfortable, his sandals set aside, his robes loosely draped. The air carries the scent of roasted meats, but food isn't the main event. The feast happened earlier. Bread, olives, fish, maybe some honey cakes. Now, as the symposium truly begins, the focus shifts to wine. Servants, often enslaved boys, move quietly through the room. They carry large mixing bowls called craters, filled with diluted wine. The Greeks never drank their wine straight. It was always mixed with water, and the ratio was carefully chosen by the host. If it was too strong, the evening would descend into chaos. Too weak, and the gathering would be dull. Getting the balance just right was part of the art. The cup is passed, refilled, and passed again, and as the wine flows, so does the conversation. Some evenings are light-hearted, filled with jokes, riddles, and playful banter. Others take on a more serious tone. Men debate philosophy, discuss politics, or recite poetry. A skilled guest might sing, another might play the lyre, its soft notes weaving between the voices. Entertainment often included hired performers, flute girls, dancers, or acrobats moving gracefully in the lamplight. But beneath this charming exterior, there was a strict sense of order. The evening had its rules, its rituals. A symposiarch, or master of the drinking, might be appointed to guide the pace, to decide the strength of the wine, and to maintain the delicate balance between merriment and discipline. However, for all its refinement, the symposium was an exclusive affair. Women of the household were almost never present. Respectable wives and daughters stayed in other parts of the home, managing domestic life. The guests here were all men, politicians, philosophers, landowners. Their talk, their pleasures, their drinking games, it was a world entirely their own. Let's think about the contrast for a moment. Outside the walls of this grand house, the streets are dark and quiet. Families are finishing simple meals of barley bread in dimly lit rooms. In the countryside, farmers are resting after a long day of toil, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. Yet here, reclining on soft couches, the wealthy pass the night in laughter and debate, their lamps burning long into the dark. It's a life of privilege, a sharp divide from the daily grind of ordinary Greeks. Where one world is marked by hauling water and grinding grain, this one is measured by the pouring of wine, the turning of phrases, and the reciting of verses. Two sides of the same society, living side by side, yet separated by a vast gulf of wealth and status. Imagine the soft clink of cups, the murmur of voices, the gentle curl of smoke from the oil lamps. The symposium lingers deep into the night, until the wine runs low and the conversation softens into a drowsy silence. One by one, the guests drift away, their sandals scuffing against the courtyard stones, leaving only shadows and embers behind. And so, we've walked through many layers of ancient Greece, from the weary grind of ordinary life to the trial of a philosopher, from the whispers of a god at Delphi to the lamplit halls of the elite. As our journey through this world comes to a close, let's take a moment to step back and reflect on the complexities we've uncovered. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you enjoyed exploring ancient Greece with me, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. See you next time. And so we come to the end of our slow walk through ancient Greece. We began not with grand temples or towering philosophers, but with the simple, steady rhythm of daily life. Picture the sound of grain being ground slowly between two heavy stones, the deliberate steps on a dusty path to a well, the familiar taste of bread and olives, day after day after day. We spent time with the ordinary people, those whose lives were shaped by repetition and necessity. Then our journey turned to one extraordinary life, Socrates. His questions were like stones dropped into the still waters of Athens, sending ripples of thought throughout the city. His death, a quiet but powerful symbol, wasn't a spectacle of violence, but a moment of calm acceptance. An ending that continues to echo through the halls of history, a quiet testament to conviction. From the bustling city, we traveled inward into the mystery of Delphi. Imagine the flicker of oil lamps casting dancing shadows on stone walls, the hushed whispers of the oracle, the cryptic utterances that could shape the destiny of kings and common folk alike. It was a place where the divine and the human seemed to meet, where every answer held within it a dozen more questions. And finally, we reclined with the elite. We joined the symposium, where wine, diluted in broad, shallow bowls, was passed around, and words flowed just as freely. Lamps cast long, dramatic shadows as the philosophical debates and poetic recitations stretched deep into the night. It was a world of leisure and intellect, a sharp, striking contrast to the calloused, weary hands of the farmers and servants we met at the start of our journey. Yet, all were part of the same society, living and breathing in the same world. What we find, when we gather all these threads together, is a powerful reminder that history is layered. It's a rich tapestry. For every famous name carved into stone, there were countless others left unrecorded. People whose days passed in labor and laughter, in hope and in fatigue. The Greece of gleaming marble temples and profound philosophy was also the Greece of dust and sweat, of simple bread, of hard work, and of small, enduring comforts. As you lie here now, perhaps in a soft bed, surrounded by the ease and convenience of the present, take a moment to reflect on that contrast. The struggles of those ancient lives, their endless, repetitive routines, stand so far behind us. We live with comforts they could scarcely have imagined. Clean water flowing with just the turn of a handle, food gathered from a brightly lit store, without a moment of toil and brilliant light available at the simple press of a switch. What was once the heavy, back-breaking labor of an entire day is now a forgotten effort for us. The people of ancient Greece lived and worked and dreamed just as we do now. Their individual voices may have faded over the centuries, but the fundamental rhythm of their lives remains faintly audible if we listen closely to history. Grain still grows under the sun, lamps still burn against the darkness, and words are still spoken in the endless search for truth. And yet, here you are, resting quietly, feeling the weight of the day slowly easing from your shoulders. Allow your mind to drift, just as theirs once did after a long day, from the world of labor into one of stillness and rest. Let the sound of the grinding stone, the murmur of voices from the symposium, the sacred hush of the oracle's chamber, let them all fade into a gentle, peaceful silence. The past is far away now, soft and indistinct, a gentle blur at the very edge of your thoughts. Rest in the comforting knowledge that history continues, that life goes on, and that tonight you have nothing more to do than simply close your eyes, breathe deeply and calmly, and let sleep carry you onward into your own dreams. Good night. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this time of reflection, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more peaceful explorations into the past. Sleep well.